Hello, welcome to the webinar by Playing Lean. Does culture really eat strategy for breakfast? My name is Bruno Pesets, and I'm one of the creators of Playing Lean, an award winning board game for teaching innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, one of the things that's very peculiar to Playing Lean is that it came out of need and it is from practitioners for practitioners. So, Simon and I are both lean startup practitioners, and when we identify need for ourselves where we want to teach others better and faster, we came up with one solution to it that worked out pretty well and is still working out. In the spirit of that, from practitioners for practitioners, we are also inviting some of the best practitioners in the field of corporate innovation, lean startup, strategy, culture, leadership. And it's pretty much in this vein that today we're hosting Cris Beswick. And a little bit of background to how I got to meet Cris and invite him over. So was it now a few months ago? We met a few years ago, but a few months ago, I was reading a report that basically suggested that the finding was that the culture isn't really that important when it comes to innovation performance, that they actually have found that both market leaders and market laggards have pretty similar cultures. And I thought to myself, this, I'm not sure what to think about it. Who should I call up for a little bit of interpretation? And lo and behold, I got in touch with Cris and we had a really good conversation around it. So I immediately asked, like, Cris, listen, we need to host you in Playing Lean Expert webinar. And he was more than happy to join. Now, before we start with the topic today, I just want to remind you that since we're on Zoom, on the bottom of your screen, you have a chat button and you have a Q&A box. So just drop in any question, anything you might have, and we will address that during the webinar. All the slides, everything that you see, you will also get at the end of the webinar. So don't stress if there was something and you didn't catch the picture. So Cris has decided to very generously share all of that. Now, Cris, don't be a stranger. Please open your video as well. As I said, a little bit of background for Cris. So he's a serial entrepreneur that turned to executive advisor. And it's kind of, again, why I appreciate Cris and people like him is because they're real practitioners. And to me, that is something that's most valuable in the world, especially in this world where there's a lot of methodologies, a lot of things that are a bit dubious and perhaps doubtful. So people that have actually walked the walk can then actually talk about how to walk that and help others walk that journey. And to me, that's a true differentiation. So I'm very happy to have you here, Cris.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks, Bruno.
So what I'll do right now is I'll put myself a little bit in the background and just let you run the show. And I'm here to help and assist.
Cool. Okay, so hopefully my tech doesn't let me down, right? Here we go. Right. What screen is it letting me share?
So I haven't prepared any jokes, but I will do some improv theater if it's
You might.
necessary.
Yeah, so my Zoom's not letting me share my screen.
Let me see.
For some reason. Let me try a different way. Right, I'm going to try it this way. Give me a sec.
No problem, no problem.
Can we see that?
Yes, we can.
Right, this is one of the issues, right? When you try and be really clever and use two monitors. So, right, forget two monitors. Let's turn that one off. Can everyone see that?
Works perfectly, Cris.
Awesome, yes. We're off. First hitch over. Right, so thanks, Bruno. So for everyone on the line, on the Zoom, it's great to be here. Great to talk to you, and thanks to Bruno and the team for giving me this opportunity. Does culture really eat strategy for breakfast? Right, that's something that I grapple with every day. It's something that you'll all be familiar with from the famous Peter Drucker. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts on that, and everything that I share with you today is actually, they're all from conversations that I have with senior teams and leaders around the world. The first thing is, as everyone will know who's either working at home or in a home office or on their dining room table, I have two 6-year-old daughters, so it's highly likely that we're going to get Zoom bombed at some point, right? Don't be afraid; they're not scary, but we may just see some little gremlins come through that back door. Here's a little bit about me. So Bruno and I met in Oslo probably about a year ago now, actually. Both working with a common client out there. And for those of you that don't know, I'm the I run a boutique advisory firm, I suppose, called Outcome. I run that with Dan Tomer. So hopefully most or all have either read my book or Dan's book. And we've pioneered something that we call AIM, which is an innovation maturity assessment. I'm not going to go into that today, but there's tons of stuff you can find out about that at your leisure. But this is what I want to talk to you about, right? Does culture eat strategy for breakfast? So hopefully most of you are familiar with the famous Drucker quote. And my thoughts on this are, if we go back into a pre-Lehman Brothers world, culture probably did eat strategy for breakfast when the world was much more linear, much more predictable. Then yeah, do you know what? Culture probably did eat strategy for breakfast. But now, post Lehman Brothers, once we went through that first crash, and now we're in this whole COVID pandemic. And we positively say post-COVID, but I don't know how many of us can be really confident we're post-COVID in any way, shape, or form at the moment. But what I believe now is culture isn't enough on its own to differentiate organizations and to certainly help them shape the future and help them push forward. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts. For any of you that know, Bruno is an avid martial artist, and I literally put this video in yesterday. It's really grainy. I apologize for that, but I couldn't find a higher res version of this. But here's what I'm frustrated by, right? And I've got some narrative for this video to sum this up. I spend my life, or certainly pre-COVID, I spent my life on a plane, probably traveling every week, certainly every couple of weeks, somewhere in the world, sitting down with a senior team or a CEO or a board and having the same conversations. And it's the questions that I'm going to share with you today. And what continues to frustrate me is the continued level of innovation theatre, right? And the continued self-professing by organizations that they are innovative, or the self-professing of their innovativeness. And the reality is most of the organizations that profess this don't really understand innovation and all of its components well enough, and they certainly don't understand building a culture of innovation. And what I'm still finding is, and what still frustrates me is, I'm still seeing global organizations, huge global brands that we all know and love well, they're still creating products and providing services that aren't really sustainable, that with brand promises that are just marketing spin, that there's no hope of them keeping those brand promises. And they're producing, those brand promises are all based around products that no one really needs because they don't solve genuine, deep problems. And more often than not, those solutions are priced too high. And all of that labeled innovation, right? I mean, think about, I don't know how many people on this Zoom own a Nissan, right? And I'm not picking at Nissan specifically, but, is it really, really, really exciting to drive a Nissan? Unless you're driving like the GTR, right? The 200 mile an hour kind of thing, right? Is it really exciting to drive a Nissan? Because their brand promise is, Nissan, innovation that excites, right? Now, are they really delivering on that? Is innovation a fundamental part of the organization? And are they really delivering excitement in all of the things that they do? And it's those kind of things that boards and senior teams call me in to help them solve and help them try and deliver on those brand promises around innovation. So I'm going to play this little video. Apologies, it's a bit grainy. Bruno's going to really relate to this. If there's any martial artists out there, you're going to relate to it. I'm going to give you a quick narrative around theatre based on this video. So watch the guy in the left and then watch the guy on the right. The guy on the left is the corporate. The guy on the right is the customer. Check this out. So here we go. We have got the most game-changing product ever. Check us out. We think it's awesome. Look how amazing it is. Right? Marketing have used innovation in every possible combination. Right? So check us all out. We're ready to go to market now. Right? Wait for the business model. Marketing's still doing their job. Right? Innovation, innovation. It's the best thing since sliced bread. Here we go. Ready to go to market. Check out the business model. Look at it. It's absolutely amazing. Right? No other business model, no other product. Right? Check this bit out. Here's the elevator pitch. And here we go. Ready to go to market. Boom. And the customer says no. Right? That is theater. Right? That's the kind of stuff that still frustrates me on a daily basis. Right? And here's another thing. Right? I saw this yesterday and this genuinely made me laugh. This was in a job advert for a senior executive, right? A friend of mine's going for a role with a very, very well-known global brand. And this was in the advert for a senior executive in the innovation space. This was in the advert. You are at one with your external radar, right? That's the kind of BS that we've got to completely cut out of the whole innovation space. This is the stuff that frustrates me. This is the stuff that keeps the senior execs that I work with up all night. And these are some of the questions that, you know, I'm on a quest to help global organizations answer. So the reality about innovation is we are now trying to solve really, really wicked problems. And, you know, we know that language from sort of the design industry and that kind of space. Wicked problems now require really wicked solutions. And the challenge around providing wicked solutions and genuine innovation, not theater, is wicked problems that require wicked solutions require wickedly different ways of doing that. And that's about culture, it's about strategy, it's about completely changing the way that we do things as organizations. Here's an example, and I've tried to bucket this in the answers that you gave back. So do you remember you all did the poll before we, over the last sort of week or so, as you signed up for the webinar? And these are the answers. I've collated these answers and sort of bucketed them into the three things that I'm going to talk about today. And the reality is we overcomplicate the whole world of innovation. We overcomplicate corporate innovation capability. We overcomplicate building ecosystems and change and creativity and innovation, all of those things. The reality is, as I see it, and the work that I do, innovation boils down to three things. There's the strategic overview and the strategic imperative. There's the leadership context and the leadership capability required. And then there's the cultural component and the scaling of capability and how we do that and how we embed it. And all of the work that I do pretty much falls into those buckets. And I'm going to give you some of the questions that I work with and help senior teams answer around these three things. And hopefully it's going to answer some of those things that you put in there as the challenges that your organization faces. So here are some thoughts on redefining strategy. We're going to do a quick poll now. I need to see, I'll just click on comments and things like that. And then the quick poll, the guys are going to put this poll up. So just quickly answer this, should only take us a minute or so. Does your organization genuinely have a clear and organization-wide definition of innovation? So I don't know how many people we've got on the call, but let's have a look. So the data's coming through. So yes, 17%. No, so 14, 86. Okay, so probably around there. That's not changing too much now. Attendees. Okay, so I think so. Half of you have voted. So let's double that. Let's take that as a fairly good cross section of answers. 86% of your organizations don't have a clear definition of innovation. One of the challenges with this is, let me just share those. One of the challenges with this is, how do we, if you look at that first bucket, right, how do we get real strategic clarity on innovation? And how do we build innovation strategies that allow us and enable us to shape the future if as an organization we can, at the very least, agree and align on what innovation is and how we define it. So what I want to do is I want to share with you, just get rid of that. I want to share this with you. One of the questions that comes up, like I say, most of these slides I framed as questions that I get asked by senior teams. So I'm going to go through some of the way that I answer some of these questions with them. Do we genuinely have a definition of innovation? This is one of the tools, or one of the ways that I think is really useful in helping define innovation, rather than the very basic, innovation is about the introduction of something new, or the fairly basic overviews that we hear. If you look in the dictionary, creating or designing something that has not existed before, or the introduction of something new, is actually the definition of invention. And I think one of the big problems in the corporate world is most organizations are actually brilliant at invention and very poor at innovation. And it stems from the definition and the difference in both of those words. So here's what I think the definition of innovation should be. It definitely should be that first bit, right? The introduction of something new. So my language is the process of introducing something new or different. That pretty much mirrors most of the definitions of invention that are out there. What I think we then have to do is start to add components in that shift us away from invention and shift us towards innovation. So the second component for me is, yes, it must be, we must introduce something new or different. The second component should be, but does it solve a genuine problem, right? We should only be introducing something new or different in response to a genuine problem. Then if we know anything about value proposition design, we know that we can't just solve problems, we have to add value to the customer and that solution as well. So for me, the third component should be, are we then adding value on top of that core solution? And then the fourth component should be, what's our ROI? What do we get as the creator of that solution? As the solver of that problem and the deliverer of that solution, what do we get? Whether it's a fiscal return, whether it's more customer stickiness, whatever it is, but what's our measurement of success? And when we define innovation in this way, we're able to use the very definition that all our strategy and everything hangs on to actually self-check progress. So if you look at these four components, as we migrate through the innovation process and as we start to solve problems and unearth problems and solve them, we can actually use the very definition of innovation to help us sense check as we go through coming up with ideas and validating them. We can use the very definition as a sense check. At each stage of that innovation process, that design process, we can constantly validate whether our solution is still genuinely interesting. Does it definitely relieve the pain the customer was experiencing? Does it really, really deliver extra gains on top of that? And are we able to do it really well? Is our measure of success still going to be achieved? Are we able to execute it well as an organization? So we can, if we're clever about how we define innovation, we can even use that definition as a sense check along with many other sense checks along our innovation processes. I think one of the other things that's really important, and everyone listening will hopefully this will resonate with, and you'll agree with this, that in order to do that, everything has to be human-centered, right? We have to understand people better as organizations. We have to understand design thinking and jobs to be done, and not necessarily those specific frameworks, but the very essence of those frameworks and what they stand for. And what they actually stand for is, how well and how good are we at unearthing genuine problems and genuine opportunities? And how good are we at getting deeper into those problems than our competitors are? And being human-centric and empathy-driven are massive components of being able to do that. So we need to build human-centered organizations. The challenge that I see very, very often is this difference between invention and innovation, and it's summed up really well by the whole jobs to be done approach. The post-it on the left is the typical user story that organizations whiz off and create solutions around. I want a longer antenna because the customers told me that in their view, that's going to give them better reception, versus our capability as an organization to say, hang on a minute, what's the real job here? And what's the context? And what's the situation the customer's in? Have we observed them? What are they doing? What is their behavior? And what are they trying to get done? And what's their measure of success? And when we understand that, we then get the real job story, which actually is when I'm on a call, all I want is to minimize the likelihood that that call drops out. And I just want a really clear connection with the person that I'm calling. On one hand, we provide a phone with a larger aerial. On the other hand, we do something completely different because we framed the problem in the right way. Typically, organizations aren't very good at that. So I referenced Lehman Brothers earlier, and here's a quick overview of what's happened since Lehman Brothers. Despite that crash in 2008, what we actually see is, and all the data suggests, that organizations that capitalize on that downturn and invest and really go long on innovation prosper beyond all the organizations that wait till the world's a bit more stable to do anything. And since 2008, you can see, as I've shown on screen there, we've seen some fantastic organizations, multi-billion-dollar organizations, have grown out of, like a phoenix out of the ashes of 2008. And I know most of you won't know Airbnb and Instagram and Stripe and stuff like that, but I'm conscious most of you will know Tinder. There's probably a lot of Tinder users listening out there. But now look where we are now, COVID-19, 2020, nearly 3/4 of the way through 2020. The challenge is the typical approach to strategy doesn't cut it anymore. And this is where we start to migrate away from Peter Drucker's culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture is the most important thing. And we start now to understand that actually strategy now in the world that we live in compared to the world we 20 years ago requires really different approaches to strategy. It requires us to start in the future and be much better at building a picture of the future state that we want as an organization, and then reverse engineering that back to our current context and our current situation. And then in a hypothesis driven way, starting to push forward and project in timelines that we can actually confidently predict. We can put things in place and execute successfully enough because the world isn't going to change too much over that time frame. And we constantly review that hypothesis and move the organization forward. But we've got to balance that with a real human-centered approach as well. And it's a very counterintuitive way of building strategies that most senior leaders have never really been taught how to do, because they've always been taught to say, well, here we are today, and let's project forward several years into the future. And we'll just start trying to aim for that from today. So future back and then hypothesis driven is alien to a lot of senior leaders and the people that are building strategies. So here are some thoughts on leadership, right? So that second component. The big challenges, and it's often overused, VUCA, but I think it's only overused because it's not put in the right context. The reality is, I think we do operate and we do live and have to build and grow organizations in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. But as leaders, and the leaders that I work with, the challenge is, how do they navigate that? And how do they change that VUCA world and reframe it to be something that isn't negative and something that we can push organizations forward in line with? And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. The first step is we have to teach senior leaders, and a lot of work I do around leadership development is helping leaders understand the things that worked well yesterday and why they don't work today, and what they might not have even heard of yesterday is now relevant and is going to work for the future. And this is one of the biggest challenges. And a lot of the answers that you all gave in the poll, the pre-webinar poll, were around leadership and mindset and not being open to change and not being open to sharing and listening to ideas. And that's because if we look at management and leadership development over the last 20, 30 years, all of those senior execs have been trained and developed, and they've been to business schools and they've been on leadership development programs, all in the pursuit of leading as we did yesterday. And very, very few of those leaders have got the capability, and it's not their fault. They haven't been developed and given the opportunity to learn how to lead in the world that we operate in today, and for a world that is constantly re-emerging in the future. The first thing that we look at and that Dan and I start to do with leaders is shifting the narrative away from short-term gains and short-term metrics. And the way we do that is to focus and go really long on purpose. There's a great quote from Elon Musk, you know, if it was just about the money, I'd have launched another internet company. There's a massive purpose behind what Elon's doing and the quest that he's on. And what we have to do in organizations is find and reframe what that purpose is and build our whole innovation strategy in line with delivering against that purpose. Right, Martin Luther King is a prime example. You know, Martin Luther King didn't stand on Capitol Hill and say, I've got an outline plan and a cash flow forecast. How many employees are with me, right? He said, look, I've got a purpose, right? Here's what I see. Here's the problem that we need to solve. Here's what I think the future could look like, right? That purpose-driven thing is super important, but it's one of the most underrated components of leadership. Language is also a great component of leadership. This is Sam Walton, who founded Walmart. And Sam's quote here is one of my favorites. Our goal is to have customer service that's not just the best, but that's legendary, right? The language that leaders use and how inspiring that language can be, again, is one of the most underrated and undervalued components of leadership. So a lot of the work that I do is around the right language and the right presenting that kind of purpose-driven future. And you know this one about same problems, same thinking, right? And we also know that creativity is a massive component of what leaders now know are or is one of the key skills for shaping the future. So in summary, here's the kind of stuff that we start to teach leaders, right? What does leading for innovation really look like? Not innovation leadership, but leading for innovation as the outcome that an organization wants. And the two components for me are purpose-driven and creativity-driven. And purpose and creativity both share one common thing. They share a huge component of empathy. They also make, when you combine them, they make people curious. And curiosity means people want to ask questions. And asking questions means people want to explore. And when they explore, they want to experiment. And all of those ingredients are what we need leaders to do for us if they're going to lead our organizations for innovation. So here's how we reframe it. Here's what we get leaders to do. We shift from volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous to visionary, unbounded, creative, and authentic. And purpose has to have authenticity, which is why that's in there. So here's the final thing, right? 5 or 6 minutes now on culture, because I think it's the combination of these three things that's important. This is from the World Economic Forum. So I'm not going to go through all these, but I really encourage you to have a look at the outgoing skills and the incoming skills requirement that the World Economic Forum's research has uncovered or has outlined. And it's really interesting when you look at everything on the right-hand side of that screen. You know, you will all read those and you go, that's innovation, that's innovation. You know, all of those things are all prerequisites for driving creativity, innovation, problem solving, shaping the future, versus all the ones on the left. All the ones are much harder skills versus some of the ones on the right are soft skills. But there's a huge correlation with building a culture of innovation. What we've also got to do as leaders is our ambitions have to match our actions. And this is genuine data from research that we do. You know, every quarter, my team does huge amounts of research to constantly validate the work that we do. You know, 75% of leaders believing they've already got the right culture, but only 37% of employees agree. That, as a perfect example, is why Dan and I built AIM, because AIM as a global assessment and organizational maturity assessment helps us uncover those inconvenient truths. It helps us show leaders that they might think they've got things in place, but actually they haven't. And then we've got to be really sensitive about what it looks and feels like to lead for innovation, right? We know we've got to have the macro things. We've got to have a strategy. The strategy's got to be aligned. We've got to define the right outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. But what does it feel like as a person or as a team to lead for innovation? That right-hand side, that personal feeling bit, is one of the things that I know is massively lacking in organizations when it comes to innovation and leading for innovation. And here's the challenge. We don't separate the different behavior well enough that innovation requires. So Bruno on a LinkedIn thing, and one of the reasons why we got to this point was Bruno put on LinkedIn, the number one reason for new products and ventures failing is due to building something nobody wants. In other words, you are the source of failure, not the competition. You have to own your success. And where Bruno and I are really aligned is the framework we use with leaders is around helping them understand and unpack what it genuinely means to own the innovation agenda. And I mean properly own the whole agenda, right? Because when you own the whole agenda as a senior leader, you're then able to understand how and what you need to do to help the middle layer, the most important layer of an organization, drive innovation on a daily basis. And when they understand how to drive innovation on a daily basis, then they're able to make it really easy for employees to contribute to innovation on a daily basis. So we call this ODC, own, drive, and collaborate. The most important factor is splitting down the two posts that you see on either side. What are the physical things that need to be in place to make ownership, driving, and contribution happen? But what are the psychological things that need to be in place? So physical is strategy and budget, and you might have a lab and there might be physical space and tools, etc. But then psychologically, right? Is there a learning culture? Is there psychological safety? Is it a culture of collaboration, etc., etc.? Is it a culture of learning? Those things, what's going to happen in terms of if I pose an idea and it's a terrible one and it fails? So social risk, as I call it. We have to have both of these things in place. And then the final thing, which is really topical at the moment, because look, we're all, I'm sat in one part of my living room. Bruno's sat on the toilet in his bathroom by the looks of it. Maybe needs a picture or some flowers or something, who knows? Right, we're all probably sat in a home environment. Are we working at home or are we living at work, right? The lines are blurred. And this whole debate around working from home and will it continue and will we all go back to the office? I think there's a real challenge here for organizations because, Zoom is great and we're all here globally from around the world talking on Zoom. But when it comes to creativity and sparking off each other and the vibe and the riffing off each other we get, and that intimacy that we need as human beings, especially when we're problem solving and when we're trying to be creative and when we're trying to connect dots and spot things, we need proximity, we need to be together. So I think there's something around physical space that's going to emerge in a completely new way that we design our work environments. There's a pure example. This is Mark Parker, who is the ex-CEO at Nike. That's his office, right? That's his office because he's design-led. He's regularly, when he was in his CEO post, he was regularly voted the most creative CEO in the world by Forbes on numerous occasions. When you look around Mark's office, every piece of thing in there is something he's found and he said, well, I like the feel of that. Right? I like the material on that. I just like the way that they've connected those two bits of material together. I like the rubber and I like that texture, whatever it is. And he collects those things because all of those things go into the design of products. We need that kind of tactile thing going on when we're designing and solving problems. So physical space really matters, right? I'm going to quickly ask you these three questions, but you're going to get these slides, you're going to get the PDFs. But as leaders, these are three questions, fundamental ones that I ask every leader, right? The most important thing for leaders is, are we asking ourselves the right question? So number one, if corporate innovation capability is a choice, it's a choice to build it. So it's a conscious leadership decision. So as leaders, what are we currently choosing to do, right? Are we genuinely choosing to build a culture of innovation, or are we subconsciously choosing to keep the status quo? Number two, strategy is about the pursuit of better, right? And so is purpose. Purpose is about a better future, right? And a brighter, more prosperous, different future and a different state than we're in today. So as leaders, they have to genuinely ask themselves, and I ask them, do you genuinely have an innovation strategy? Do you genuinely have a definition of innovation, which is why we did it as a poll? Have you genuinely doubled down on purpose? Is it a real core part of your business? And are both of those things aligned, your strategy and your purpose? And then the third thing is, none of us can influence results, right? We can influence processes, we can make them more efficient, we can influence skills, we can influence behavior. What we hope is the better we do that, the results come as a byproduct of those processes and behavior. So the final question that I have for leaders is, will your current approach to leadership and your current culture enable you to shape the future that you want? And I'd encourage you guys to think about those questions and go back to your business and ask the same thing. So in summary, that's why I think strategy used to eat culture for breakfast, but now if you really want to shape the future in the context of that VUCA world, strategy, leadership, and culture need to eat breakfast together. And we have to find a way of aligning all of those three components into an ecosystem approach. But there's one final thing I want to share with you. Innovation and creativity needs us to be a bit different. It needs us to be demonstrably different in some cases. It needs us to be a bit crazy. Remember that quote, the crazy ones, you know, the Steve Jobs thing, you know, here's to the crazy ones. The challenge is we can't afford to be batshit crazy, right? There's crazy and then there's crazy, right? So innovation requires us to be different, but, you know, not that kind of crazy. So thank you guys. My contact stuff's on the screen. Feel free to reach out. You're going to get the slides. And I think, Bruno, we got time for questions, right?
Yeah, we have plenty of time. So you can just stop sharing the screen so people can enjoy our beautiful faces in a
That's it.
really large format. So I have quite exquisite bedroom over here. So
It's beautiful.
it's the most gorgeous one you have ever seen. So as Chris said, feel free to drop questions both in the chat and the Q&A, and we'll address them. And I also have some of my own as well. So kind of what I really picked up, and I just want to draw attention back to it because Chris mentioned it both explicitly, but then demonstrated over and over again. And that was the power of words, the power of language. And that is, for me, working in an environment where it's multiple languages. So I'm a Croatian living and working in Norway, working primarily in English. So other Norwegians and other nationalities, we all work in English. And kind of you can really see different languages and the struggle between the words. And words really do make a difference. And one I like to differentiate is looking at ambiguity versus uncertainty. Kind of in the world of innovation, like when Chris asked you, how did you define innovation in your organization? That to me is ambiguity that should be obliterated. There is no reason for that word to be ambiguous in your organization. It can be differently defined in another organization, but in your organization, when someone says Apple, everybody should know what they're thinking about. But uncertainty, on the other hand, that is something that we need to learn how to embrace when it comes to innovation and all the process. And that's the beauty of language. So it's kind of using that to our, because some people say it doesn't matter, but I think it's just a wrong position to say, like tomato. Yes, it does matter at the end of the day, because if we don't agree on the basics, who knows what might happen.
Look, and it is really important, right? I mean, I've lost track now, you know, I've lost track of how many boardrooms I've sat in where the senior team have said, yeah, we've got a strategy, we've got an innovation strategy, right? And then I say, okay, great, right. Let's just start, unpack your definition of innovation for me then. And you almost get blank stares, right? And if you then really push them and say, well, guys, just write it down for me then. And there's 10 different ones, right? It's mind-boggling to me how senior exec, these are super clever people, right? You know, some of the brightest people I've ever worked with who believe that they have an innovation. You know, when you unpack it, it's one PowerPoint slide, right? but you have to be you cannot have a strategy if you can't agree organization wide what the definition is that that strategy is there to deliver, and that everyone understands how to deliver against the definition. But it's super common, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why we still have a lot of, we've got a lot of theatre, but we've also got a lot of genuine attempts and real passion and enthusiasm, but that don't yield the results because the basics aren't in place. And some of the basics, to your point, is actually simply just language and definition.
And that's both good and bad news. It's kind of, you just need to become aware of it because it's not rocket science. And then like the fix is simple. It's what you again called out, like owning your success is part of that. Just saying, okay, now we're gonna fix that. As simple as that. You see something spilled, you wipe it. I will read out some questions because
can you just pick the easy ones though, right?
Pick the easy ones. Well, I'm gonna pick the compliment first. It's actually not a question at all. So, and Andy compliments you that job story versus user story is a brilliant way to actually explain the problem with how he nicely calls them solutionizers, people that really like solutions. So
that's a good one.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy. But it seems that the two questions that we currently have are connected to what you were sharing about proximity. So Andy is asking, if physical space matters so much, how would you advise us to deal with current remote challenge and overcome the challenges that are coming with the current situation?
So I think this is a really interesting one, and I had a conversation with someone on LinkedIn yesterday, just going backwards and forwards on messaging, and they threw the word fidgetal at me. So it's this blend of fidgetal. Yeah, I've never heard of that, right? So it's this blend of the physical world and the digital world. So let's put this in the context of, let's say we globally get another spike, right, all around the world, and we're back in lockdown. Everyone's in their houses, no return to work or anything. I think this problem becomes really, really difficult to solve. But what we're on the verge of now is people starting to go back to work and people starting to go back to offices. And the debate now is, well, is it 50% of my time? Am I going in the office 2 days a week? And am I working from home 3 days a week? What's the split? What I think will happen is, I genuinely believe we cannot drive the kind of creativity and innovation if we're not physically together. How we interact as human beings when we're physically together versus digitally, and you can use all the tools you want. You can use Mural and we don't work the same. We spark off each other. There's chemistry when you're in the room with people, right? You don't have those little moments of, hey, Bruno, just go through that thing again that you just said, because I think I might have something. You don't get those bits, right? And they're super important. As an ex-designer, right, you cannot underestimate those little, they're not water cooler moments because they're not done around the water cooler, but you just, the interplay when you're together and you're in a room solving things is just wholly different than the digital world. What I think, and what I would like to see and what I think will happen is organizations are definitely going to scale down the number of seats that they cater for, right? So, I live in London, work in London predominantly, where, we've got organizations that have got 3 or 4 floors of massive tower blocks, right? 2,000 people, 3,000 people every day going into Canary Wharf. I think what we're now going to see is maybe 600 or 700, maybe or 1,000, right? 25%. So they're not going to go, well, we did have 4 floors, we now need 1. I think they're going to go, we did have 4 floors, we're now going to have 2. One of them is for all the staff that you would normally come back in, but our other floor now is a collaboration space. So rather than have, we're a global brand, we've got offices all over the world, and we've got a lab and we've got an innovation space, right? But you want to book a meeting and you can't get one until 3 weeks on Thursday because there's not enough meeting rooms. I think we're going to see the repurposing of space to be, now that's an innovation room, and that's an innovation room, and that's an innovation room. And me and Bruno and 5 others are going to book that room for the next month, because that's where, when we do come in 2 days a week, because we're working remotely the other 3 days, that's our innovation room for this project. right? And I think we're going to see really clever use of space for collaboration, creativity, and innovation. So almost more purposely used space purely for problem solving, creativity, and innovation. That's what I think will happen, but I might be wrong.
It's you mentioned a lot of things that we could go like really deep, but it's kind of there is plenty of research that's supporting a lot of what you're saying, especially in terms of sometimes described as network effects, kind of where the weak relationships can trigger new discoveries and insight, which still doesn't happen so much in this collaborative software, remote software, etc., because it's much more focused. It's different in energy, and therefore we focus differently. While kind of
Yeah.
when we're in person, it's quite different, and it comes to information flows. So
Yeah.
first, in this exchange, we limited the type of information that we are sharing. We are extremely focused. While in physical proximity, we are not just sharing orally and intellectually. I mean, here obviously you can see me from above, but you cannot see my whole being. You don't get to experience me in whole. We don't get to experience each other in whole. We cannot
No.
physically interact with things. So
No.
there is a lot in that. But kind of coping, I think that you mentioned it a lot around innovation, proximity, etc. But drawing the line on a bit higher level, like I would say that to innovate is to be human. So kind of
Yeah.
creativity and imagination is one of inherent human traits.
Yeah.
So it's really like innovation is the ultimate respect for humanity within large organizations. So it kind of
Absolutely.
You mentioned purpose. What better purpose for all of us than to actually bring something to life
I completely
repeatedly?
agree. And the reality is, you know, I genuinely believe we do that better when we're physically together.
Let me, so that we don't steal precious questions from the people putting them in. So Cris continued on that, and let me see this question. So she's continuing on Andy, and even if the innovation team has bin bags and dartboards, that's part of the theater, the guy doing the dance, don't we want innovation through the whole company?
So look, I wrote, here's the thing, right? I've written a couple of books now, right? And the one that was the bestseller was the one that I don't agree with the title of, right? So I wrote a book called Building a Culture of Innovation. And I actually don't think the challenge with culture is the presumption is that it's all encompassing, right? And that culture is everyone. And what we didn't really make clear, I don't think, in the book is culture in an organization, like in society, is actually about just enough people to tip over the edge, so that the general feel is that is the culture, right? Now that doesn't mean that it's 51%. It's not as binary as that, but you don't need everyone in an organization to share your views or share your thinking. We don't have that in society. If someone says to me, well, Cris, what does it mean to be British? And I'd say, well, it means this and this and this. But it doesn't mean that every person in Britain, every English person shares those views. We have polarization in some parts of society, but in general, there's a feeling that it means these traits. An organizational culture is the same. So building a culture of innovation is just about the movement inside the organization that tips the scales, where you say, do you know what, innovation is demonstrably and visibly and measurably a core part of this organization, rather than innovation is just about, we're 50,000 people, but actually the innovation is just the 200 that are on the innovation team. So it's about just shifting the balance so that the feeling is that innovation is a genuine component of an organization. And it's no more complex than that. The reality is you don't want everyone in an organization saying, I will contribute to innovation, because some people don't want to do it, right? And that's okay, right? Some people just want to say, do you know what? I do a good job. I'm a reliable employee. I'm trustworthy. I'm here 5 minutes before I need to start, and I leave 5 minutes after I should do. You know, not the other way around. Not I'm always 10 minutes late and I'm putting my coat on half an hour early. You know, and I turn up and I do a great job and I earn my money. But I don't, you know, that other bit, that, you know, the innovation thing isn't for me. You need people in organizations. It's a bit like the dual operating model thing, right? The Kotter dual operating model. You know, you need a core cohort of people to keep the wheels turning and keep the business running. But a culture of innovation is purely around where do we get to the point where we've tipped the scale so that we go, do you know what? Now it's a very, very visible component of our organization.
Let me just quickly check the time. So we are going to do one more question and then we're going to slowly wrap up. So the question is by Hoyt. I even made a small illustration to double check if the question is understood right. So he asks, if I think of strategy and culture and leadership as a triangle, what's the point on top that drives the other two? Is it strategy? Is it leadership? So I guess.
So this is really interesting, right? So I've just unpacked this for a client. And I think there's something really, if you take that Venn diagram, right? So do it as you've done it or do a Venn diagram. I think there's something really interesting about this. And I think there are 3 layers. And we're just thinking about how we present this now because it came up in a call with a client. I think there's 3 layers in an organization, and each of those layers have 3 points, and all of the 3 points you can put a pin through them all, right? They all connect. So I'm going to go back to the first bit, and then get to the strategy, leadership, and culture bit after. This particular client said we've gone long on design thinking, right? So design thinking is our core framework, our innovation framework. The question was then, so what is the organizational architecture that will best support design thinking? So if you boil design thinking down into 3 components, boil it down basically, right? You know, you've got British Design Council's Double Diamond, you've got loads of other people have gone, well, we've got 5 bits. If you boil it down into its simplest form, design thinking is no more complicated than unearth a problem and articulate it, creatively solve that problem, and then get that solution to market, right? Those are the 3 core components. So the question was, what's the best organizational architecture to support? If we want that happening all the time, how can we support that by architecturally redesigning the organization? So what we've said is, the next layer above that then, if you want that happening on a daily basis, and that's the fundamental tool and framework, the organization can support that with these 3 things: intelligence, collaboration, and adaptability. So intelligence feeds the first part of design thinking. Intelligence is basically about how do we become more intelligent about the world than our competitors, than everyone else? How do we become better at unearthing problems, wants, needs, trends? And we've got so imagine all of the tools that we can do: scenario planning, horizon scanning, all of that, right? And you build that capability. If you build that intelligence capability, that you can physically put a pin through that and through the part of design thinking, right? If you build that capability and you're now, through that intelligence capability, you can now unearth deeper, more systemic, higher value, more complex problems than your competitors. The next stage of design thinking is you've got to creatively solve those problems. The likelihood is you won't be able to solve those problems. They're deeper than you've ever unearthed before. They're more complex. They're more systemic, but they're super valuable, right? High value, right? But the likelihood is you probably haven't got the ability to solve them. So you've then got to collaborate in a much different and much wider way. You've got to collaborate better internally, and you've got to collaborate better externally. And we have a whole framework around that, right? So that collaboration directly, again, you can put a pin through that straight into the solve part of design thinking. Then the final bit is, how do we validate it and get it to market faster than anyone else, right? Super important in today's environment because stuff's shifting all the time. So the third component is, how do we become much more adaptable as an organization? How do we get better at adapting and shifting behavior? How do we get better at experimenting? So all of the tools in place, sandboxing, experiments, prototypes, all of those things. And organizations talk about them all, but very rarely are very, very good at all these things, right? So imagine you've got your first triangle thing with find a problem, solve a problem, get it to market. You've now got another layer on top of that, which is then the organization can help support that: intelligence, collaboration, adaptability. If you stick the third layer on that, it's strategy, leadership, and culture. So strategy is around that intelligence, unearthing problems, creating direction about where do we want to go. So this is part of that is innovation thesis. Where are we going to play? Why are we going to play there? What do we want to pursue? Why won't we pursue this? Why won't we back these things, et cetera, et cetera. The second bit is how we operate as an organization, and that is absolutely on leadership's shoulders. How do we collaborate? What's the infrastructure? How do we work internally? How do we lead and build that ownership and drive and collaboration bit that I shared earlier? And then the third component, adaptability, then is all around culture. So that's then when the process migrates to people and scale and experiments and validation, etc. So I think there's 3 layers of 3 components which layer on top of each other. And the organizations that get that right are going to be the ones that win. And that's how we look at it anyway. That's what we're now starting to teach senior leadership teams. And those 3 layers came up very recently, actually, in a conversation with a big European brand.
What you described sounds a lot like Toblerone to me. That's what I will tell you.
Totally, right? And it tastes the same, right? It's sweet, it's dark, it's a little bit nutty in places.
Yes,
but,
exactly.
And and if you're in the right mood and it's a Friday night, you can finish a whole one to yourself, right? So look, but when I talked at the start and I said wicked problems require wicked solutions, right? Wicked solutions now require us as organizations to do things demonstrably different. We have to have a really clear departure from the old way of working, the old leadership approach, the old organizational architecture, right? All of those things we need to redesign and evolve them. And that framework, the intelligence, collaboration, and adaptability, we frame that in that's about building the next iteration of your organization, right? What's the next version of your organization that underpins the fact that design thinking, jobs to be done, all of that, i.e. innovation, is the core thing that you want happening on a daily basis. The organization has to be structured to promote and enable that behavior. And that means we have to redesign the architecture of organizations.
And I think this is absolutely perfect way to wrap this up. If you agree, perfect. And I would like to thank you, Cris, for joining and sharing this wealth of knowledge. So
my pleasure.
I don't have to say I think, but I know this was useful to everyone who has been present and who will later rewatch it. There was like a real wealth of details and information, so this is worth rewatching for sure. And what I would also like to thank you, audience, everybody, for participating, asking questions, and hope to see you in the next webinar, which will be with Esther Guns, which will continue this topic, but now from the perspective of professionalizing lean innovation process. So looking at it from another perspective that contributes to everything that Cris was sharing as well, slowly building the knowledge base. So thank you for coming, Cris. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.